Alex Pereira opened up about which fight has been his favorite so far inside the UFC and explained why it stands apart from his upcoming rematch against Magomed Ankalaev, set to headline UFC 320 this Saturday in Las Vegas. The Brazilian, who in just 3 years under the UFC banner, has already been part of historic battles and legendary rivalries, reflected on his career and highlighted the moment that has marked him the most up to now. The UFC 320 card is shaping up to be one of the season's biggest highlights, with the main attraction being the light heavyweight title clash between Pereira and Ankalaev. That fight alone carries massive weight. It is the rematch of their UFC 313 showdown, where the Russian shocked the world by defeating the Brazilian in dominant fashion. On that night, Ankalaev outworked the then reigning champion over 5 rounds, imposing his game plan clearly and leaving Alex unable to find answers to shift the tide. From that point forward, what began as mutual respect gradually transformed into rivalry. As the date for the rematch drew closer, tensions escalated, reaching a boiling point during a heated encounter at the UFC Performance Institute in Las Vegas. What once looked like a strictly competitive matchup has now taken on a more personal tone, raising anticipation for the second chapter inside the cage. Even so, when Pereira looks back on his run in the UFC, he makes it clear that none of his fights with Ankalaev, or even with other top names of the division, compared to his rivalry with Israel Adesanya. For Alex, that remains the biggest and most defining rivalry of his entire career, perhaps even one of the most significant rivalries in modern MMA history. From the moment he arrived in the UFC in 2022, Pereira carried with him the baggage of his kickboxing past with Adesanya. Having already beaten the Nigerian in their prior encounters in the ring, Pereira's entry into MMA came with a compelling storyline that fans latched onto. Within just a handful of fights in the UFC, Alex found himself standing across from the reigning middleweight champion in a showdown that stopped the fight world. That fight, the third meeting between the two, when including their kickboxing history, turned into one of the most legendary moments of Pereira's career. Despite falling behind on the scorecards in the early rounds, he stayed composed and uncorked a stunning knockout in the 5th round, ripping the belt away from Adesanya and carving his name into the sport's history books. During media day, leading up to UFC 320, Pereira was asked about his favorite fight and broke down why the Adesanya victory remains so special, while also pointing out the major differences between that rivalry and the one he currently has with Ankalaev. Nothing compares to that victory over Adesanya. With all the history we had in kickboxing, everything I went through, and the weight that fight carried, a lot of people think that to promote a fight, you just have to talk trash and create animosity. But that's not it. You need a story, a real background, and that's exactly what happened with Adesanya. Ankalaev, on the other hand, is doing everything wrong, the Brazilian said. What makes the Adesanya rivalry even greater, according to Alex, is the fact that both men were seen as global stars of the sport. They weren't just talented fighters. They were magnetic personalities who could draw attention worldwide. That simply isn't the case with Magomed Ankalaev, who, despite being champion, lacks the same charisma and worldwide pull. This perception has even been echoed by other names in MMA. A former UFC heavyweight recently went as far as to claim that Ankalaev is actually hurting the UFC by holding the belt without being able to draw true interest to the division. Meanwhile, Alex Pereira keeps dropping hints that, regardless of what happens at UFC 320, his long-term future might not be confined to light heavyweight. Throughout his reign, and even now as challenger, he has consistently floated the possibility of moving up to heavyweight. At the pre-fight press conference, he once again stated that this move feels almost inevitable in his journey, fueling speculation of potential mega fights in a division stacked with giants like Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall. So UFC 320 represents more than just the chance for Alex to reclaim the light heavyweight crown. It is also a pivotal moment in his career trajectory. While he reignites his heated rivalry with Ankalaev in the immediate term, Pereira never stops reminding the world that the fight which truly defined his UFC legacy so far was against Adesanya, a clash that transcended the sport itself and, in his eyes, remains incomparable. Alex Pereira, known for his intimidating presence and the aura of danger he brings into every fight, surprised MMA fans by admitting that he has indeed felt fear when facing an opponent. The Brazilian, who steps back into the octagon this Saturday for his light heavyweight title rematch against Magomed Ankalaev at UFC 320, recalled a striking moment in his journey when he stood face to face with a man who, in his words, looked like he wanted to kill him. Hype for the rematch with Ankalaev is at a fever pitch. The bout headlines the October 4 card in Las Vegas and comes just over 7 months after the Dagestani fighter triumphed in their first encounter. Since then, Pereira has downplayed his rival, insisting that Ankalaev is far from the most frightening opponent he's ever shared the cage with. For many fans, Alex Pereira himself is one of the most intimidating figures in the UFC. His cold walk to the octagon, stone-faced demeanor, and terrifying knockout power make him a nightmare matchup for anyone. But Poatan confessed that the shoe has been on the other foot before. There was a time when he was the one feeling the fear. Before rising to the top at the light heavyweight, Pereira had already made history at middleweight. His march toward the title shot against Israel Adesanya in 2022 was meteoric, highlighted by brutal knockouts and performances that left no doubt about his danger. After debuting with a crushing finish over Andreas Michailidis and grinding through a war with Bruno Silva, Alex rediscovered his lethal rhythm at UFC 276 in July 2022, when he flattened Sean Strickland in the very first round. Curiously, it was in that very fight that Pereira admitted to having felt fear. Speaking to Sopapos MMA, he revealed that Strickland's presence inside the octagon affected him in a way he didn't expect. Talking about my last fight, Strickland had 25 fights, he was doing well in the UFC, ranked number 4 at middleweight. He's dangerous, he's experienced. I was afraid, but when I heard him talk, I relaxed a little. He's a good fighter and experienced, but he'd say things that made no sense. For months after the fight was booked, I felt fear, but it was controlled fear. But let me tell you when I was really scared, when he walked into the octagon and started staring me down. He had never looked at me like that before. That was the moment I felt fear. He was another person inside the octagon, completely different from his usual personality. I thought, this guy wants to kill me. I'm telling you, it was a different person altogether. But in the end, it was good that he came in like that. Because it woke me up, it made me realize the danger. And I knew I couldn't make mistakes. That account revealed a more human side of Pereira, who is usually viewed as an unflinching warrior. Strickland's intensity that night forced Alex to recognize the risks and sharpen his focus. The approach worked. Pereira unleashed a brutal hook combination that left the American unconscious in the very first round, earning himself the shot at Adesanya months later. Ironically, respect later turned into friendship. Strickland, one of the UFC's most polarizing fighters, went on to train alongside Pereira and Glover Teixeira, forming an unlikely but highly effective trio. The bond has become so strong that Strickland has taken part in multiple training camps with Pereira, including the current one ahead of UFC 320 on social media. Strickland even joked about the environment at Glover's gym in Connecticut, where Brazilian fighters dominate the mats. Why does a gym full of violent Brazilians exist in Connecticut? He wrote, captioning a picture alongside Pereira and the former light heavyweight champion. Now, as Alex Pereira readies himself to try and reclaim the belt against Magomed Ankalaev, he carries with him not just the experience of battling terrifying rivals, but also the reminder that even the scariest fighter in the UFC can feel fear when confronted by someone who looks ready to do anything inside the cage. This Saturday, Alex Pereira will have the chance to pen yet another historic chapter in the UFC and further cement his legacy among the sport's greats. At UFC 320 in Las Vegas, the Brazilian takes on Magomed Ankalaev in a direct rematch for the light heavyweight crown. Beyond seeking revenge for his loss earlier this year, he also has the chance to achieve an unprecedented feat in MMA's modern era. The clash, set for October 4th at T-Mobile Arena, replays the drama of UFC 313, where the Dagestani fighter shocked fans worldwide by outstriking Pereira across 5 rounds, seizing the belt and shattering the aura of invincibility that had surrounded the Brazilian since his UFC debut. Many argued Pereira did not look like himself that night, but the loss still stung, chipping away at his status as one of the promotion's brightest stars. Since that night, the rivalry has only intensified. Just this week, at the UFC Performance Institute, Pereira and Ankalaev nearly came to blows during a tense face-to-face encounter. adding more fuel to the fire heading into fight night. It's worth remembering how meteoric Alex Pereira's UFC rise has been. Officially signed in 2021, the former Glory kickboxing champion needed only a few fights to challenge for the middleweight strap. His spectacular knockout of Israel Adesanya at UFC 281 rocketed him into stardom, turning him almost overnight into one of the sport's most popular figures. Soon after, he moved up to light heavyweight and captured gold again, solidifying his reputation as one of the deadliest competitors in contemporary MMA. Yet the March loss to Ankalaev not only cost him the title, but also dented his momentum. From being the face of the UFC, Pereira spent months somewhat in the background, watching other stars shine. Now, at 38 years old, he has the opportunity to regain both his belt and the admiration of fans worldwide. And more than that, if he defeats Ankalaev and reclaims the light heavyweight title, Alex Pereira will become the first fighter in the modern UFC era to win 3 championships across 2 different divisions. The only man to accomplish something similar was Randy Couture, who claimed his 3rd belt back in 2003 at UFC 44 when he beat Tito Ortiz, forever cementing himself as one of the sport's greatest legends. But Poatan has made it clear that he doesn't intend to stop there. Throughout his reign at 205 pounds, there were constant rumors that he would eventually move up again, this time to heavyweight. With his size, power, and kickboxing background, many believe it's only a matter of time before he makes that leap. And on the eve of UFC 320, Pereira once more emphasized that his long-term goal is to achieve what no one has before, capturing titles in 3 separate weight classes. If he succeeds, Pereira won't just add another belt to his collection. He will solidify his status as one of the most versatile and dominant fighters to ever grace the octagon. First as the destroyer of Adesanya at middleweight, then as the ruler of the light heavyweights, and perhaps soon as the man who conquered heavyweight. Therefore, UFC 320 is more than just a rematch. It may very well be the turning point for Alex Pereira to reclaim his former glory and begin a pursuit of history that could forever redefine his place in the MMA pantheon.